So this is my second of 3 chapters I plan to share with you guys from my upcoming new book, The Light Between the Leaves, which will be out in April of 2026. As I mentioned in my first video, each of the 6 truths I discuss in this book is broken down into 3 sections. There's a backstory, there's the lesson I learned from that story, and then there's the application I've taken from that lesson that makes it something I think that anyone can use and apply in their own lives. Today I'm going to share with you one of the story sections from the book. The stories by themselves don't necessarily contain a lot of actionable mental health or self-help ideas. So you're not going to come away from today's content with like this brand new concept that you can apply to your life. That's what the rest of the chapter is for. But the backstory to a lot of these concepts really adds a lot of depth and context to where I'm coming from with these ideas. So I just want to give you a sense of what those sections of the book will be like as well. So this is from Truth 2, Envy is Ignorance. And this is the backstory to that lesson, which is called The Lake. The splash was so loud, I thought someone had died. My sister was crying. My brother was hyperventilating. My mom was panicking. I couldn't piece together what had just happened. We had all been fishing together in our favorite bay. Even though it was straight across the water from our house, it felt like entering another world. There were no houses or roads on that side of the lake, so the whole area felt much wilder and more primitive than on our relatively developed shore. There was an underwater island centered within the bay, where the water was only a few feet deep, and we could easily see all the way to the bottom. Surrounding the island was a rapidly sloping drop-off, where the vibrant, lush green of the lake bottom descended eerily into an impenetrable darkness within a foot or two. This is why I'm not an audiobook narrator, because I can't talk. For as long as I can recall, looking into the dark part of the water gave me an ominous feeling. I always wondered if something was looking back at me from just beyond where I could see. That foot or two of in-between space was where the best fishing was. We could almost, but not quite, see the bottom. Tendrils of weeds and cabbage sprung up from the lake floor, creating fractals and patterns that twisted into unseen depths. The holes between the weeds always held fish. We loved to drop our neon lures into these holes and wait for them to disappear, the telltale sign that they were now inside the mouth of an unseen fish waiting just beyond where we could see. The mystery and excitement of reeling in with no idea what was on the other end was exhilarating and addictive to me. It made the anxiety of sitting next to the foreboding darkness of the drop-off tolerable. Strange things tended to happen to us in the bay. It was our lake's version of the Bermuda Triangle. There was a school of what had to be over 1,000 ciscos, silvery baitfish that seemed to swim endlessly in circles, constantly suspending just off the drop-off. Right around sunset, the entire school would sometimes leap violently from the water in unison, giving the surface of the lake the appearance of a pot of boiling water. Our mother theorized that something was chasing the ciscos and causing them to panic, but we never saw anything following them. I found it incredibly disturbing to think that anything could scare fish so badly that they would flee to a place where they couldn't breathe just to get away. The other mystery of the bay was the splashing. Fish jump from time to time, turtles and frogs hop into the lake from shore, and waterbirds land, so splashing is a common enough sound on the lake, but this wasn't the sound of any of those things. It was something louder, more aggressive, and seemingly much larger. We thought it might be a beaver slapping its tail on the water, warning us to stay out of its territory, but we had never seen a beaver in the bay, and beavers aren't exactly renowned for their stealth and subtlety. There also weren't any lodges or dams on that part of the lake, so I was always skeptical of the beaver hypothesis. Many lessons in the wilderness are learned the hard way, and figuring out the best way for 3 excitable, impulsive children to simultaneously fish out of a 14-foot boat was one of them. When all of us were trying to cast, lures and hooks would whiz by our faces like bullets, sometimes coming within inches of eyes, ears, and noses. We miraculously managed to avoid hooking each other, but our mother's expensive prescription glasses did nobly sacrifice themselves to save her left eye on one occasion. Thankfully, the casting drama mostly ended when we discovered Dangling. Because the lake was so clear, if we were fishing somewhere shallow, we could just look down into the lake and find fish. Once we spotted one, we'd drop the lure straight down into the water, skipping the process of casting entirely. We called this style of fishing dangling, partially because that's what we do with our lures, but also because it's what we would do with our legs. Dangling was most fun when we sat in a row on the side of the boat with our spindly little appendages hanging inches above the water. We felt more connected to the lake when we did this, and it added an extra layer of visceral excitement. Having all the human weight on one side of the boat caused it to angle sharply towards the water, giving us the constant feeling that we were on the verge of falling in. Sometimes our toes would even dip into the water on windy days. Dangling worked best on glass days. That's what we called it when the sun was shining and the wind was a whisper. With no waves to disrupt the surface of the water, glass is exactly what the lake looked like. It perfectly reflected the ring of evergreen trees surrounding the lake and the deep blue sky above. And more importantly, we could see even further down into the water than when the chop of the waves divided the surface. The closest comparison I can provide to looking down into the water on a glass day is looking at the night sky on a cloudless summer evening out in the country. It's absolutely stunning. Glass days were our favorite days to dangle, and this was a perfect glass day. I knew it from the second I opened my eyes and looked out our bedroom window to see the big white pine motionless and unbothered by the wind. Dangling in the bay was all I could think about that morning. My siblings had been fishing on one side of the boat, while I was trying the opposite side. Our mother was up front, keeping us right on the drop-off where the fish were. Then I heard the splash, that familiar sound that echoed across the bay from time to time, but this time much louder, much closer. It sounded as if it was inches away. My first thought was that one of my siblings had accidentally knocked the other into the lake, but when I spun around to see what happened, they were both still sitting on the edge of the boat like nothing happened. Then I realized how still they were, unusually still, as if they were frozen, and they weren't fishing. That's when my sister started to cry. It wasn't a normal cry. It was a scream cry, a cry of fear rather than sadness, a sound I had never heard come out of her before. Our mom kept asking her what had happened, wanting desperately to provide comfort or reassurance, but not knowing how. She was just as in the dark as I was about what exactly had just happened. Finally, my brother spoke. His voice was ragged with adrenaline, and every word seemed to require unimaginable effort to force out of his hyperventilating body. It was a muskie, and it was huge, and it tried to eat Allison's fish. Now I understood. Not just what happened seconds ago to cause the chaos, but every mystery of the bay that had left us baffled for years. Moments before the splash, my sister had been lifting a small sunfish out of the water to unhook it. She was blissfully unaware that the fish she had hooked was being watched. A massive predator fish had been stalking it from the depths, waiting for the right moment to strike. When my sister pulled the fish from the water with her rod, the sudden movement triggered the predator fish's prey drive. It rushed to the surface at full speed and launched itself completely out of the water, inches from her face, in a desperate attempt to catch its unexpectedly fleet lunch. Muskellunge were practically an urban legend on our lake. We had read stories about their size and ferocity, but we had never actually seen one before that day. We heard that they grew to sizes exponentially bigger than anything we had caught. They were also said to be relatively unafraid of humans, and would sometimes approach swimmers and boats with curiosity instead of darting away out of fear, as most fish do when they encounter people. Everything I knew about them made them sound like something that didn't belong in a lake. Anything that big and aggressive should be relegated to the oceans with the sharks. We quickly motored back to home to gather our nerves, quite finished with fishing for the rest of the day. According to my siblings, this fish lived up to every seemingly implausible description of a muskie we had been told about. My sister, 9 years old at the time, said the fish was bigger than her. Its mouth was said to have held a row of serrated teeth that resembled a bread knife. My brother mentioned something about a dark look in its eyes that he couldn't quite articulate. Apparently, this thing was pure nightmare fuel. Muskies are relatively territorial, especially the larger, older fish. If they find a consistent source of food in an area where they feel comfortable and secure, they typically make that area their home and they don't stray too far from it. This muskie had almost certainly been the unseen predator haunting the Ciscos in the evening, and the source of the mysterious splashing that would echo across the bay from time to time. Even though we had never seen it before that day, it had probably been lurking within casting distance of our boat for years, hidden just beyond where we could see. My sister named this fish Nemesis. We told stories about him, made drawings of him. He became an almost mythological figure in our family, a cryptid come to life in front of our eyes on a random glass afternoon. Although we never saw him again after that day, our awareness of his presence changed things. We didn't really dangle anymore. We would still occasionally fish without casting, but sitting on the edge of the boat with our toes inches from the water no longer felt like innocent, harmless fun. I tried it once and couldn't stop envisioning Nemesis rushing up from the depths to bite my foot off because he mistook my toes for Cisco's. We still loved fishing, but it felt different. There was always a hint of nervousness, even when fishing outside the bay, as we wondered if we might catch a glimpse of another sea monster. We reeled our fish in a little bit faster, yanking them from unseen jaws below the surface. Once, I hooked something clearly much larger than our usual sunfish and perch, and when my father came over to help me, I shoved the rod in his hands and ran to the back of the boat, terrified to look at what was on the end of my lure, and thoroughly convinced that I had actually accidentally hooked into Nemesis. It was a 3-pound bass. For me, it also created a lot of existential concerns. I wondered if anything in life was as happy, idyllic, and carefree as it seemed, or if everything was like the bay, haunted by an unseen predator lurking just beyond my perception. Was there always darkness below the surface? Was everything being chased by something? For the first time in our lives, we finally had confirmation of something we had always sensed. Monsters really did lurk in the darkness. So that's the end of the backstory. And that then goes into a discussion about the dangers of envy and looking too deep into people's lives, or possibly not looking deep enough into people's lives, and never really knowing what's underneath the surface beyond where you can see. I hope you enjoyed this reading, and I hope you'll consider picking up this book when it comes out in April. It is available for pre-order currently on all major platforms: Barnes & Noble, Walmart, Amazon, pretty much anything you can think of. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for listening.